Well, well, well. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. Hope everybody's doing okay. My name is 12 Gauge, and this is 12 Gauge Investigative. I know I'm starting a little earlier because, I'm going to go to the gym after this, so I don't want to be in there at midnight and stuff because this presentation is going to take a little bit. So, how's everybody doing tonight on this St. Patrick's Day? St. Patrick's Day was one of those days that was always fun for me back in my drinking days. The green beers and everything else that went along with it. Anybody celebrating tonight as we're speaking? Anybody drinking at the moment? Got your drink? Getting your drink on? I mean, it's allowed. You guys are over 18. The gym is for quitters these days, 12. Well, it's hard to go. It's hard to go every day, but, sometimes you got to. How's it going, Texas? Hope everything's going good with you. Well, have any of you heard about this presentation that I'm going to give tonight on the i-5 murderers? There's one that's a murderer and one's a strangler. So, I don't know if they were trying to one-up each other or something like that, but either way, they still are kind of weird. Hold on a second. I hate when Gmail does that. And I might have a guest. I have a guest with me tonight if she decides to come in. Allergies are tearing you up. Okay. I hate to hear that. They were me too earlier, but I took an Allegra D and kind of cleared me up. But let's get on with this. The first one's going to be the i-5 killer. Hopefully it doesn't copyright me. And here we go.
NFL draft. The Green Bay Packers selected one of the most violent killers in U.S. history. No one is saying football led Randall Woodfield down his dark path, but did it perhaps deter him, at least for a while? Even as crime scenes go, this one was sensationally gruesome. Sherry Hull, age 20, lay slayed naked on the floor, blood pooling near her matted hair, brain matter seeping from her skull and spackling the carpet. She was surrounded by her discarded clothes. Gradually, her moans and her deep, labored breathing diminished until her body was drained of life.
I don't have to say trigger warning or anything. If you're in this channel, you should know by now. This is an adult channel. We're not going to do the trigger warning and all that good stuff. We're just going to show it how it is. And if you can't handle it, I don't know what to tell you. But I think most of the people in the chat can handle it. Can I get a hell yeah? Can I get a hell yeah from the chat? Y'all quit being so damn quiet. Here we go.
Sometime around 9 o'clock in the evening of January 18, 1981, Hull had been nearing the end of her Saturday night shift, cleaning the Transamerica office building in the central Oregon town of Kaiser. She was preparing to leave when she was grabbed by a man who'd somehow managed to enter the building. He was strikingly handsome, maybe 6 feet tall, blessed with a torrent of thick, curly brown hair and eyes to match. He was wearing jeans and a leather jacket. Corralling Hull with one hand and holding a gun in the other, he walked her down a hall. Soon he saw another cleaner, 20-year-old Lisa Garcia. The assailant took both women into a back room and ordered them to the floor. After sexually assaulting them, he shot them each in the back of the head. This, it would later be revealed, was generally in keeping with his MO. Some sexual act followed by a .32 bullet to the rear of the skull. But while Hull died of her gunshot wounds, Garcia survived by feigning her death, lying motionless on the floor with slugs lodged in the back of her skull. As soon as her attacker left, she called the police. En route, one officer noticed a thickly built man fitting the assailant's description standing at an intersection. But this was more than a mile from the attack. It would have taken a hell of an athlete to make it that far so quickly on foot. So the policeman drove on.
Isn't that weird how in some of these crimes, the police they interject with the killer or they're so close to them and somehow they're able to elude the police, like this case right here. They're like, there's no way he could have ran that way. There's no way. So they just kept going. There was another case where the killer encountered the police, and instead of making a left, which he would have ran right into him, he made a right, and he kept on going. And of course, we know the Idaho case where, what were they? Like a block away? Man, these killers have the shamrock on their side for sure.
For weeks afterward, Garcia worked with detectives to crack the case. Little did she know this attack was one of many allegedly carried out by the same man. She was helping track one of the most notorious serial killers in U.S. history. Nicknamed the i-5 Killer, he had threaded a trail of almost unspeakable brutality up and down the upper left corner of America, killing in California, Oregon, and possibly Washington. His orgy of violence started in the mid-1970s. By the time he'd gotten to Hull and Garcia, he'd already amassed a sizable necrology. Many more murders would follow. Based on DNA evidence and advancing crime lab techniques, the i-5 killer's body count has climbed through the years. Cold case detectives have conservatively put that number at a dozen, though a few journalists and armchair detectives believe he's responsible for as many as 44 deaths. And that doesn't include a string of more than 100 other crimes.
44 deaths, supposedly. Man, this dude was on a mission for sure. WOODFIELD was his last name.
Mostly robberies and rapes that bear his hallmarks. The i-5 killer's victims were mostly from the same subset, petite, Caucasian women in their teens or 20s. Sometimes they had declined his sexual advances, and the killings seemed to be acts of retribution. Other times he didn't know his victims at all, but he had his way with them and then snuffed out their lives because he could. And then there's this small detail, which Garcia shared with detectives and which surfaced again and again across the i-5 killer's crimes. He wore what appeared to be a strip of athletic tape over the bridge of his nose, in the manner of a football player at the time, which stood to reason, because not long before turning into one of America's most depraved and remorseless serial killers, Randall Woodfield had been drafted by the Green Bay Packers. The new coach had to have been torn. He wanted to pump up the Portland State program he had just taken over, and placing a guy in the NFL would go a long way toward that. But he also...
Yes, I believe so, Texas. I think it was in the 70s. So pay attention to that, because that's going to be something that's going to be very telling, to be able to have that strip of tape across the bridge of his nose. Because who would have thought that this would have concealed his identity?
Also knew that if he oversold a player, he'd lose credibility. So on that fall day in 1973, as Ron Stratton sat in the bleachers of Multnomah Stadium, now Province Park, home to MLS's Timbers, he chose his words carefully. An NFL scout had come to see Randall Woodfield, the Vikings' leading receiver. He had been impressed with Woodfield's hands and athleticism, but when he asked Stratton for further assessment, the coach wavered. "Randy runs decent routes," Stratton said with enthusiasm, "and he's good to the outside. He spoke positively about the speed that enabled Woodfield to run high hurdles for the school's track team, but he also mentioned Woodfield's glaring deficiency. He didn't like getting hit, not by the safety, not by the linebacker, not by anyone. The I-5 killer, recalled by his former teammates and coaches. He was the nicest, most gentlemanly kid I ever knew. Years later, a reporter from a San Francisco newspaper called me and asked, "Do you know a Randall Woodfield? Did you know he's the I-5 killer?" I said, "That can't be. Probably the wrong Randall Woodfield." When Stratton was named Portland State's head coach a year earlier, it had marked a rarity, though scarcely acknowledged.
Who would think that, some of these people that were around, I'm saying we because we all are a part of this society, we could be among killers every day of the week and not even realize it. Have you ever wondered that? Have you ever thought that? Like, through the grocery store, in the gym, wherever, you're just thinking, oh, I'm just working out, I'm just getting some groceries. But how many people do you pass their path that has an evil killer vibe to them that could have just killed somebody? Look at Brian Koberger. Went into Albertsons. How many people did he pass that morning? Tough.
At the time, he was just the second African American in the modern era to hold that position at a predominantly white school. Stratton was only 29, less than a decade removed from playing at Oregon. As a former linebacker, he was quick to notice receivers who resisted cutting across the middle of the field. "It's a point of character," Stratton told the scout. "Woodfield doesn't have that." To Stratton, this softness, this dislike of confrontation, was in keeping with Woodfield's genial personality. It wasn't just that Woodfield was, in the cliché, coachable. Maybe more than any other player on the team, he seemed to seek out the staff for companionship and counsel. "He was always bopping by our offices before heading to class," recalls Stratton. "It was like he just wanted to hang out with us." Teammates and coaches' memories of Woodfield vary wildly. Some remember him as unassuming and quiet, if a bit odd. "He really didn't fit in," says Anthony Stodmeyer, who was a freshman quarterback at PSU in 1973. "He'd make out-of-the-blue, off-the-wall statements." Stodmeyer's brother, Charles, both are uncles of 1995 to 96 NBA.
Texas, you played football, right? Did you ever know anybody like that would make off-the-wall comments, was kind of socially awkward, just didn't fit in? Are these things that are generally spoken of many people in a matter-of-factly way?
NBA Rookie of the Year Damon Stodmeyer was a halfback on that team. He recalls Woodfield for his vanity. Randall was always grooming himself. That even carried over to the way he played. He seemed like he was more interested in looking cute out there than getting the job done. True as that may have been, the pride Woodfield took in his appearance was justified. He was 6 feet with negligible body fat, well-defined muscles, and a sly smile framed by what today might be called a porn stash. To trade in understatement, he did not struggle to find female companionship. He was a suave, sophisticated fella, says John Carey, a PSU quarterback in '72. Confident in himself, but not to the point of being cocky. Woodfield may have been best known at PSU, though, for his devotion to the Campus Crusade for Christ and the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. A former teammate who spoke on the condition of anonymity recalls, "It seemed real important to him that he come across as someone who would do the right thing, almost like it was keeping him together." Armed with the resources and facing the public relations pressures of a modern-day NFL team, the Packers would have conducted a detailed background check.
Isn't that what we always hear about killers, is they try to fit in? Even if they are a little awkward, even if they're just a little whatever, they still try to be that nice guy, that helper, that appearance that they keep, they want people to trust them, not necessarily run from them, right?
On Woodfield, and the proverbial red flags would have flapped wildly. Raised mostly in the picturesque Oregon mid-coast town of Otter Rock, Woodfield grew up in a fiercely aerial job at the phone company Pacific Northwest Bell. His mother was a homemaker. Woodfield had two older sisters who would babysit him. The family was well known and well regarded in the community. Outwardly, Woodfield appeared to be the portrait of normal. But in high school, he was caught standing on a bridge and exposing himself to females. His parents sent him to a therapist who, by all accounts, was not overly concerned by a teenager's exploring his sexuality. According to law officials, Newport High's coaches knew about the situation, but wanting to
That's not odd, is it?
protect their star, chalked it up to an adolescent's lapse in impulse control. Police say that when Woodfield turned 18, his juvenile record was expunged. He was a little strange, maybe stranger than we thought. You just had a bad feeling about the guy, like there was something underneath his mask. Later, at Treasure Valley, Oregon Community College, where Woodfield played football for one season before transferring, he was arrested for allegedly ransacking his ex-girlfriend's home. With little evidence, he was found not guilty in a jury trial. At PSU, Woodfield was arrested multiple times for indecent exposure. He was convicted twice. Stratton, who didn't recruit Woodfield, says he didn't learn of those arrests until years later. "If I had known," he says, "I would have said something to interested NFL teams for sure." As it was, having done little in the way of intel, Green Bay remained interested in Woodfield. In the first round of the 1974 NFL Draft, the Packers selected Richmond running back Barty Smith, who would go on to start 42 games in 7 seasons. The next day, they used their 15th-round pick on Dave Wanstead, the natural-born leader who never played a down but who went on to become an NFL head coach. 2 rounds later, with the 428th pick, Green Bay took Woodfield. These may not have been the dynastic Packers who won the first 2 Super Bowls in the 1960s, but this was still a celebrated franchise. Woodfield was offered a 1-year contract to serve as a skilled football player for $16,000. The deal came laden with bonuses, an extra $2,000 if he caught 25 passes that fall, $3,000
Golly, $16,000 a season? That's almost like $1,000 a game. That's decent, I guess.
if he caught 30. "Here's what you need to keep in mind about those figures," said Bob Harlan, who as assistant GM handled the team's contracts that year and whose son Kevin, now a prominent broadcaster, was a Packers ball boy back then. When Bart Starr made $100,000, people thought he was overpaid. Woodfield's contract also stipulated that he keep himself in peak condition, avoid consorting with gamblers, and wear a coat and necktie in public places. He signed almost immediately. The money enabled him to quit his job at a Portland area burger chef. But beyond that, this was all validation. He was on the verge of
Me too, Texas. I weighed that like my junior year.
playing in the NFL. Everyone made such a big thing when he was drafted. One of Woodfield's roommates told the Oregonian. He put a lot of pressure on himself to make it big. That April, Woodfield attended a mini camp in Scottsdale, Arizona, an innovation of Green Bay coach Dan Devine. As special teams coach Hank Coleman explained beforehand in a letter to players, the minicamp would be a get-acquainted period, so that in July we can all start working toward our common goal, the championship. Afterward, Woodfield returned to Portland galvanized, impressed with the speed of the other players, but confident he would make the team. Per the Packers' request, he spent the next months staying in shape and working on his pass catching. In June, the team sent him a first-class plane ticket, along with instructions for an airport limo pickup that would take him to the team's training camp in De Pere, Wisconsin. Woodfield declined, opting instead to drive out from Oregon. When he arrived, his bio in the Packers media guide listed him at 6 feet, 170 pounds, and assessed him as follows. In July, Woodfield was among the rookies who in a scrimmage at Lambeau Field. Writing in the Green Bay Press-Gazette, Cliff Crystal, now the Packers team historian, sought out Woodfield for a quote. "I'm pretty excited," the young wideout said. "I'm just really thankful for the opportunity. Woodfield survived early cuts and reported to friends in Portland that he was acquitting himself well, that he
Oh, wow. He was from Portland? I didn't realize that. I thought he just played football there. See, the guys back then just still worried about their hair and everything else. Good, you know.
felt as if he belonged. The Packers thought otherwise. They released Woodfield on August 19, 1974, before their season began. Woodfield would later contend, not unreasonably, that his prospects were hindered because Green Bay was stressing a run game that season. Police would contend that the team had other reasons. Rather than return to Oregon, Woodfield remained in Wisconsin, settling an hour and a half west in Oshkosh, where he played for the semi-pro Manitowoc Chiefs and moonlighted as a press break operator. While he would have preferred to spend his Saturdays at Lembeau, Woodfield reckoned that playing on Saturdays nearby for the Chiefs, maybe Packers execs would notice him and reconsider their decision. Teammates from that stop recall Woodfield as a smooth operator, a ladies' man, and a bit strange. Fred Auclair, a teammate and roommate, recalls Woodfield bringing home
A bit strange.
a trinket he had acquired at a local Christian bookstore. How much was that? Auclair inquired. Well, said Woodfield, it wasn't really for sale, so I stole it. Woodfield, adds Auclair, was on the phone all the time, telling tall tales. He had a woman in every port, it seemed. As Woodfield had at Portland State, he ran precise routes and distinguished himself with speed in Manitowoc. In the 1974 Central States Football League Championship game, he caught a pair of passes for 42 yards, though the Madison Mustangs beat the Chiefs 14-0. The Packers, meanwhile, went 6-8, and as a team averaged only 13 completions per game. It shocked me when he went to jail. If there were 100 guys on the team, he'd be the 99th guy I'd suspect to do something like that. After the season, though, Woodfield was dropped by the Chiefs. No reason was given publicly. There were murmurs, however, that the team had off-field concerns. The Chiefs, along with their league, disbanded in 1976. While there are no public arrest records for Woodfield in Wisconsin, a detective would later learn that Woodfield was involved in at least 10 cases of indecent exposure across the state.
So, I'm asking you, chat, would that be a red flag to be looking into Mr. Woodfield? 10 indecent exposure cases? Do you think he might have a problem?
As one Wisconsin law enforcement officer recalls, years later, Woodfield couldn't keep the thing in his pants. By multiple accounts, Woodfield was devastated by being cut. Deeply hurt was the phrase the Oregonian would later use. And curiously, Woodfield acted as if he knew there would be no more invitations from other teams. With his ambitions of being a pro football player killed off, he drove back to the West Coast. And then the rampage started. It took some time before Randall Woodfield graduated to murder, but the buildup was steady. Back in Portland, he drifted to the margins. He was 3 semesters short of completing his physical education degree at Portland State, but he rejected suggestions that he return to school. Instead, he cycled from job to job, residence to residence, romance to romance. He was 20.
Wow, that's what Portland looks like? I didn't have a clue that it was that big. It's a pretty huge city. I thought it was smaller than that for some reason. That looks pretty good size. I like that sign.
24 and moving backward in life. Woodfield would show up at Portland State on occasion to work out with his old team. By then, Stratton had been replaced by Mouse Davis, who would later coach as an assistant in the NFL and become known as the grandfather of the run-and-shoot offense. Woodfield seemed like a nice kid. He was a good athlete, Davis recalls today. But one of the other players said, "Coach, don't get too close with that guy. He's strange." That was the end of my relationship with him. In early 1975, Portland police were vexed by a series of attacks on women carried out by a man
I like me some Carl Jr., though. Hell yeah.
invariably described as athletically built and handsome, armed with a knife. After demanding oral sex, he would take a woman's purse or wallet and run off. On March 5th, detectives set up a sting operation. An undercover female officer walked leisurely through a park, and a man wielding a paring knife darted out from behind some bushes demanding money. Officers converged and arrested the assailant, who identified himself as one Randall Woodfield. Charged with robbery, Woodfield gave an extensive interview to police. He claimed he didn't drink or smoke and that he was committed to his Christian faith. He admitted to some impulse control issues and some sexual problems, and he confessed to one vice: he'd taken steroids to augment his physique. Maybe, he speculated, that charged his sex drive. There was a conventional wisdom back in the day that someone who was an exposer or a peeping Tom wouldn't elevate to more serious crimes, says Lieutenant Paul Weatherroy, a longtime Portland cold case detective who
We know different now, don't we?
retired from that job last year. We've learned that nothing's further from the truth. Former PSU teammates threw Woodfield a party to celebrate his release from prison, but some thought it strange when the guest of honor arrived 2.5 hours late to his own event. Woodfield also got out just in time to attend his 10-year high school reunion in Newport. There, he wore his muscles almost as a fashion statement and told stories about his time in the Packers organization. Out of prison, he cut a contradictory figure. For all his failures, let go from bartending gigs, jettisoned by girlfriends, they hardly seemed to come at the expense of self-confidence. He cruised around Portland in a gold 1974 Champagne Edition Volkswagen Beetle and took unmistakable pride in his physique. He was especially fond of sending naked photos of himself to women. In late '79,
What? That was a thing back then? I thought that was just a new internet type thing. He used to send peen pics. Whoa. Wow, Polaroid. Let's bust out the Polaroid.
Woodfield was photographed in a state of undress, his abundant muscles abundantly oiled. He mailed the image to Playgirl for consideration. The following May, he received a letter back. "Congratulations, you've been selected for possible publication in Playgirl's Guy Next Door feature." Woodfield waited for his photo shoot, and that's when police believe he began to murder. On October 11, 1980, Sherry Ayers, an attractive 29-year-old, was found raped, stabbed, and bludgeoned to death in her Portland apartment. According to the coroner, she died from blunt force trauma and knife wounds to her neck. Former classmates at Newport High, Ayers and Woodfield had reconnected at the reunion and had then seen each other socially. Immediately, Woodfield was pegged as a suspect, based mostly on his recent release from prison. When homicide detectives questioned Woodfield, they found his answers evasive and deceptive, but he declined to take a polygraph.
You just never know, Texas. That's an interesting thought there, buddy.
Blood test did not ink Woodfield to the crime, nor did his semen match that found in the victim's body. In a time predating reliable DNA testing, there was no other physical evidence. Apparently emboldened, the one-man crime wave picked up momentum. 7 weeks later, Darcy Fix, 22, and Doug Altig, 24, were shot to death, execution style, and with a .32 caliber revolver in Fix's portal home. Again, Woodfield had a connection to the murdered woman. One of his closest friends, a teammate from PSU's track team, had dated Fix. Again, Woodfield was questioned, but police had nothing concrete linking him to the murders. On December 9, 1980, a man wearing a fake beard held up a gas station in Vancouver, Washington, just across the Columbia River from Portland. 4 nights later, in Eugene, Oregon, a man wearing a fake beard and a Band-Aid, or what looked like athletic tape, on his nose, raided an ice cream parlor. The next night, a drive-in restaurant in nearby Albany.
What? He raided an ice cream parlor? Homeboy was getting desperate for some dessert.
Oregon, was robbed by a bearded man. A week after that, in Seattle, a gunman matching the same description pinned down a 25-year-old waitress inside a restroom and forced her to masturbate him. Hull and Garcia were sexually assaulted and shot in Central Oregon 4 weeks later. Word began spreading that there was an I-55 bandit marauding up and down the northern half of Interstate 5. a ribbon running parallel to the Pacific for the 1,400 miles between the Mexican and Canadian borders. All of the crimes occurred within 2 miles of an interstate exit. The spree accelerated, each time more twisted and horrific than the last. On February 3, 1981, Donna Eckert, 37, and her 14-year-old daughter, Janelle Jarvis, were found dead in their home in Mountain Gate, California, just off I-5. Each had been shot multiple times in the head. Lab tests would later reveal that the girl had been sodomized. Earlier that same day, an 18-year-old waitress was kidnapped and raped after a holdup 15 miles to the south in Redding. The next day, a similar crime was reported 100 miles up I-5 in Wairika, California. By then, word of the I-5 bandit had amplified to the point that women were being warned to exercise caution. On Valentine's Day, 1981, Candy Wilson implored her 18-year-old daughter, Julie Reitz, to be careful. There's a dangerous person out there. Later
He does sound dangerous, doesn't he, guys?
that night, Julie was shot and killed at their home in Beaverton, Oregon, not far from where the Nike campus now sits. She had known Woodfield previously. In his job as a bouncer, he had overlooked her fake ID and let her into the bar. From one act to the next, the descriptions were remarkably similar. An athletic man armed with a silver .32 caliber revolver and wearing tape or a Band-Aid over his nose, abducted a woman, committed a sexual act, and then shot her execution style. Detectives targeted Woodfield as their suspect, convinced that the receiver who turned squeamish running across the middle of the field had become an astonishingly brazen murderer. Pick a country and you likely can find a citizen who is killed ritualistically and repeatedly. Consider the phrase run amok, which derives from a Malay word translated loosely as to attack with homicidal mania. Believing that amok was caused by an evil spirit, Indonesian culture tolerated these violent outbursts and dealt with the after effects with no ill will toward the assailant. The underlying premise, the capacity to kill indiscriminately.
I mean, that had to be terrifying back then because there was no DNA, there was no cameras everywhere on every corner. There were just, you just heard probably weeks after the last murder happened. So the news was behind every crime by weeks. So it took forever to hear certain things. So that would be a very fearful time.
Wells in all of us. Most people just suppress the urge or avoid the spirit. Still, the serial killer occupies a singular role in the cast of Americana. Here, he, and the vast majority have been male, has been hyperbolized and fetishized, even romanticized. Serial killers are responsible for only a small fraction of the murders committed in the U.S., but they are some of the most notorious figures in our history and culture. Says Sarah Weinman, who runs the newsletter The Crime Lady, serial killing is twisted fantasy that has roots in the wide-open American landscape, where it's all too easy to hunt and kill without detection and with impunity. It was in the 1970s that agents Robert Ressler and John Douglas of the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit coined and defined the term serial killer, distinguishing one from a mass murderer who may kill many at once or a spree killer who lacks a so-called cooling-off period between murders. Indeed, the 70s marked the crimson.
Wasn't that guy with the glasses, wasn't that Albert Fish? Or was that other guy, Ed Gein? I get them all confused. I mean, there's so many that were just without remorse. I mean, they hurt a lot of people.
Crimson-stained height of serial killing in the U.S. In that era, there were a number of factors working in the assailant's favor, from lax gun laws to the popularity of psychedelic drugs to the sprawling interstate highway system to cheap gas, and from the dearth of surveillance technology to the spotty coordination among police precincts. It may never have been easier to avoid getting caught. He was a pretty quiet guy, not very talkative, kept to himself. I've got a team photo and he's sitting right behind me. I would have never thought he was capable of being a killer. Woodfield wasn't the only sociopath terrorizing the West Coast around that time. Ted Bundy's killing orgy in the Northwest is believed to have begun in 1970.
Texas. Almost like you knew, buddy. Good job.
Before his first 8 known victims slain in either Oregon or Washington. And roughly concurrent with the I-5 killer, Gary Ridgway had begun committing ritualized murder in Seattle, mostly targeting young women. It would take 20 years before he was caught, but immediately he was known as the Green River Killer, a nod to the waterway where his first 5 known victims were found. What accounts for our captivation, warped as it might be, with serial killers? Evolutionary biologists have pointed out that as a species, we are hardwired to run away from predators in a way that we don't reflexively run away from, say, sunbathing or eating bacon or other potential causes of death. So the serial killer triggers fear and a visceral reaction rooted in the most basic human nature. Others cite the stirring exploration of the darkest corners of humanity. Serial killers may commit acts of unadulterated evil, but they also are figures that generate at least a teensy measure of titillation, sometimes even affection. See,
I was thinking the same thing, Texas. I mean, during that time, there was a lot of them roaming California, Oregon, Washington, all up and down the coast. There was a lot of serial killers during the 70s and late 60s.
Lecter Hannibal. In a perverse way, you sometimes end up rooting for these guys, says Skip Hollingsworth, a true crime writer whose latest book, The Midnight Assassin, focuses on a series of unsolved murders in 1880s Austin. Who killed Lorenzen Wright? Hollingsworth even sees overlapping elements with football. The reason we love to watch wide receivers is because they're so elusive. They run a particularly designed route, hoping to wriggle free and catch a pass despite a defense stacked against them. It's the same reason we're fascinated with serial killers. They come up with a particularly designed killing route, carrying out the kill and then make their escape, eluding the cops and crime scene technicians, only to do it all again after taking a breather. And while we call serial killers monsters, often they are all too human. There's something unsettling but almost a little tantalizing in the capacity of everyday people, siblings, classmates, co-workers, teammates, to carry out such chilling acts. He seemed like such a normal guy, is the inevitable refrain from the shocked neighbor. This was a central theme for Anne Rule, a prominent true crime writer who in her best-selling book The Stranger Beside Me portrays Ted Bundy as a handsome, well-spoken, good-looking law student who happened to kill at least 30 women. Rule has conceded, "I can't remember thinking that if I were younger and single, or if my daughters were older, Bundy would be almost the perfect man." From her home base in the serial killer hotbed of Seattle, Rule grew interested in the I-5 case and published a book in 1984 about Woodfield titled The I-5 Killer, a meticulously reported account and an invaluable resource in this story. Rule's book relied on public documents as well as interviews with detectives, family members, and the sociopath himself. She was clearly captivated by Woodfield's conventional upbringing, jock pedigree, and good looks. Even the breathless jacket synopsis asks how a suspect who seemed so handsome and appealing could have committed such ugly crimes.
Do you think that some of the bases that people go along these days is why they believe that certain people are capable of committing crimes, and then other people, there's no doubt whatsoever that they could have done it? Like if the person is younger, they're a college student or anything like that, or they've even just working a job or whatever, and they look half-assed normal. There's no way they could have done it. He looks like such a normal guy. But you get a person that looks like an ogre, oh my God, most definitely he did it. Shrek, he was on one that night. He killed 50 people that night.
The I-5 killer's downfall came swiftly and without much drama. A persistent detective, Dave Komanek, led the investigation. He worked in the sheriff's office of Marion County, Oregon, where Hull had been murdered, and he had his suspect pegged early on. Woodfield had already served a prison sentence for preying on women. He was acquainted with multiple victims. He certainly knew his way around the I-5 corridor. and he matched the physical description provided by multiple witnesses. What's more, Marion County detectives put together a payphone call log that showed Woodfield using calling cards within a few miles of various murders.
Look at that. Even before cell phone, they were able to kind of get phone data off calling cards. Y'all remember the calling cards that you used to have to type in a big old long number to get free long distance? Let's say you were calling long distance, you could type in that calling card number and get a free long distance call. They were able to even get phone data back then. It wasn't the same as now, but hey.
Irony was rich. The son of a Pacific Northwest Bell employee would be done in partly by phone records. After Lisa Garcia picked Woodfield's photo out of a lineup, a police interrogated him on March 5, 1981. They searched his residence, a room he had been renting from an unsuspecting family in Springfield, Oregon, and found telling evidence. The same brand of tape that had been used to bind victims, a .32 caliber bullet in Woodfield's racquetball bag. 4 days later, police charged him with Hull's murder, Garcia's attempted murder, and 2 counts of sodomy. Woodfield, employing a public defender, entered a plea of not guilty. By March 16, indictments were rolling in from various jurisdictions in Washington and Oregon, including multiple counts of murder, rape, sodomy, attempted kidnapping, armed robbery, and possession of firearms by an ex-convict. The obligatory Oregonian headline, "Friends Utterly Shocked by Arrest of Woodfield." But that wasn't really the case. As one former PSU teammate puts it, "You just had a bad feeling about the guy, like there was something underneath his mask," says Carey, Woodfield's quarterback. "I was surprised when some of this stuff started coming down, but on reflection, I thought, that does sort of add up." When Woodfield's trial for the incident with Hull and Garcia began in the summer of 1981, it marked the first murder trial for an earnest, fledgling Marion County prosecutor named Chris Van Dyke, whose famous father, Dick, had recently finished up a run on The Carol Burnett Show. At the time, the prosecutor characterized the accused as an arrogant, cold, unemotional individual, probably the coldest, most detached defendant I've ever seen. By his own reckoning, Van Dyke had armloads of evidence, overwhelming evidence, and Woodfield's defense was flimsy, predicated on mistaken identity. At one point, the defender's lawyer went so far as to suggest that Garcia's identification of Woodfield was influenced by a detective's hypnosis. When Woodfield eventually took the stand, he spoke softly, with his arms crossed, looking nothing like a star athlete or a handsome Lothario. Here's how Rule put it. Randy Woodfield had been touted in the media as a massively muscled professional athlete. The man in person seemed strangely diminished, not a Superman after all.
Oh, wow. Do you think that's a tactic? We want you to lose the muscle. We want you to lose some of the weight. And by the way, shave that porn stash off your face. We don't want the jury to be able to think that you're capable in the least of committing such heinous crimes. Because if they see an individual that's muscled up with a mustache and all the trait that they have of the potential murderer, they're going to find you guilty for sure. And look, isn't that what we're seeing in one of the cases today? Is that not what we're seeing at all?
He looked, if anything, humbled, a predatory creature brought down and caged in mid-rampage. Bizarrely, he admitted in court to having owned a .32 caliber pistol, but said that when he'd learned that as a parolee it was a violation to own a firearm, he threw the gun into a river. Lisa Garcia, meanwhile, was the key witness.
Could that have been the Snake River, maybe? See how we can add all this stuff up. It was the Snake River, I know it.
Recalling the horrific night at the office building 5 months earlier, she maintained that the man she faced in the courtroom was the same man who, she alleged, shot her and killed her coworker. It took the jury 3.5 hours to reach its verdict. On June 26, 1981, Randall Woodfield was convicted on all counts. With no death penalty option in Oregon, Woodfield, then 30, was sentenced to a prison term of life plus 90 years. That December, 35 more years were added to his sentence when a jury in Benton County, Oregon, convicted him of sodomy and weapons charges tied to another attack in a restaurant bathroom. District attorneys up and down the I-5 corridor had a decision to make. Even if they could secure a conviction, what would be the point? Woodfield was already almost certain to die in prison. Additional trials would drain their offices of time and resources and would put the victims' families through an excruciating ordeal. Even in California, where Woodfield was accused of killing a mother and her daughter, and where the death penalty would have been an option, the local prosecutor eventually decided against pursuing Woodfield. Still, the list of his victims has grown. In 2012, detectives in the Portland Police Bureau's Cold Case Unit, benefiting from new magnetic bead technology at the Oregon State Police Crime Lab, announced that they had matched Woodfield's DNA to evidence from 5 victims: Fix, Jarvis, Eckard, Altig, and Wrights. In July 2000,
Isn't that amazing? In 2012, all those years later, the cold case was able to tie these to Woodfield.
2005, on account of similar DNA matches, Weatheroy, the former Portland lieutenant and cold case supervisor, interrogated Woodfield about his connections to the unsolved crimes. Out of the Oregon State Penitentiary for a day, sitting across from Weatheroy on the 13th floor of the Justice Building in downtown Portland, Woodfield was pleasant company. I remember that his hair was perfect, feathered and combed. He had a perfectly even tan, nails manicured, says Weatheroy. He was very charismatic, which makes sense because he would lure victims and get them to let their guard down. Woodfield, though, confessed to nothing. Ultimately, as in other jurisdictions, authorities in Portland's Multnomah County decided not to prosecute the murders of Altig, Ayers, and Fix. They did, however, hold a press conference to make it clear. In the unlikely event that Woodard was ever granted a parole hearing, they would pursue these additional indictments. Jim Lawrence, another detective in Portland's cold case unit, is intimately familiar with the case of the I-5 killer. A veteran detective who has interviewed the most hardened criminals, he is struck most by Woodfield's utter lack of accountability or remorse. Even decades later, even in the face of indisputable evidence. If you're talking about somebody moving towards some form of rehabilitation, they had to at some point acknowledge that they're responsible for their own behaviors, said Lawrence. That is not Randy Woodfield. If Woodfield were somehow to be paroled tomorrow, if he would reoffend, there's no doubt about it, says Lawrence. Even to this day, he is still a stone-cold killer. Psychologists will tell you it's a fool's errand, a gross oversimplification, that there's no sense looking for one trigger or single event that can explain what infernal misfire, what faulty circuitry could have turned a man into a serial killer. And still, there's a temptation, near irresistible, to plumb the psyche and fashion an answer to the elemental question we all have of serial killers: why? Anne Rule, who passed away last year at 83, long ago concluded that Woodfield killed women as a form of rebellion against his authoritarian mother and 2 older sisters. While in prison, Woodfield sued Rule, unsuccessfully.
Did you hear that? Authoritarian mother and 2 unruly sisters. Let's kind of take that little information and put it in our pockets. Wonder if that fits another crime.
For $12 million on grounds of libel. Lawrence, the Portland detective, offers a different theory. There had to be something that happened to him sexually in his formative teenage years that caused him to look at sexual activity as power fulfillment as opposed to an area of procreation and of intimacy. What about the sport Woodfield played so expertly? Football did this, has become the quick and easy explanation for all sorts of antisocial acts, from slugging a fiancée in a casino elevator to running a dogfighting ring. A sensationally violent sport breeds sensationally violent behavior. Special rules are conferred on star athletes, plumbing senses of entitlement, the peculiar rhythms of the sport. One intense day followed by 6 days of recovery and preparation are out of whack with the rest of society. teams and an image-obsessed league have mastered the arts of willful blindness and damage control. Asked about Woodfield in September, Bill Tobin,
Yeah, I agree
a
with
longtime NFL.
I agree with that. Hey, Truth, thanks for being here. And you're probably right. Instead of the snake, it's that other one. I agree with the football aspect of it because, you're primed to accelerate in your mind and everything else is going so. It's almost like a high. Once you stop playing, you look for that high in everything that you do. And hell, it sounds like he got high off killing. It sounds like he enjoyed it, like it was just a sport, a hunter.
Exec, who was Green Bay's director of pro scouting in 1974, claimed not to recall Woodfield as a player, much less now that a former draft pick of his was a convicted killer. Yet Portland detectives maintained that the Packers quietly cut Woodfield in part because of off-field concerns. I know that was a factor, says Lawrence, that he was caught exposing himself. But in the case of Randall Woodfield, it's not merely an oversimplification to blame football. It's at odds with the facts. If anything, football was a temporary source of salvation, delaying Woodfield's horrific behavior. Survey the timeline, and it's easy to make the case that football, beyond being a driving motivation for him, was also a distraction from a primal instinct that had, perhaps always, churned within. Only when football was no longer part of his life did he take a truly dark turn. The Portland Police Department's property room sits in an industrial pocket of town, right by the Willamette River. There's a section dedicated to the documents pertaining to Woodfield. Here lie copies of decades-old search warrants and affidavits, as well as a trove of relics from the Packers. Police searching Woodfield's residence realized that he kept every correspondence bearing that green and yellow logo, every envelope with the return address of 1265 Lombardy Avenue in Green Bay. According to rule, Woodfield even kept in his wallet a carbon copy of the airline tickets the Packers sent him back in June 1974. Woodfield, she wrote, would carry the stack of personal letters and mimeographed sheets with him throughout his myriad changes of residence. They were akin to messages from Hollywood to be a would-be starlet. They were magic. Once the magic went away, it was replaced by the sinister. Woodfield is 65 now. 35 years after his conviction, he sits in Oregon State Penitentiary, nestled among Douglas firs and the Cascades, located in Salem, fittingly barely a mile from I-5. The Oregon Department of Corrections denied an interview request on the grounds that it brings notoriety to the inmate. And this is already a high-profile individual and doesn't fall within the rehabilitation and correctional plan of the inmate. Woodfield did not respond to letters or electronic correspondences from SI seeking comment. This much we know, however. Woodfield is still a football fan. Prison guards recall that he loves to talk about the sport and still remembers his playing days 4 decades ago with striking specificity. Weatheroy, the detective, saw this firsthand. When Woodfield learned that Weatheroy's son was a high school star in Portland, the inmate grew animated. He loved talking about sports, says Weatheroy, his high school career, playing in college, his time with Green Bay. When the conversation turned to weightier topics, however, Woodfield clammed up, tried to change the subject, and grew distant. Woodfield did join MySpace in 2006, and his profile was as close as he's ever come to taking ownership of his past. It also says plenty about how he still self-identifies. I spend the remainder of my days in prison because I've committed a murder along with many other crimes. I once tried out for the Green Bay Packers. The only reason I didn't make it is because the skills I had to offer, they didn't need at the time.
That was amazing. He had MySpace. I was almost like, how the hell did they have a cell phone in prison where you could do MySpace? But then I'm like, okay, 12, come back to reality, bro. Almost everybody has a cell phone. What do y'all think about that? Give me some feedback. That was a good one, huh? I mean, none of these topics are good. I'm just talking about the presentation. the video because, I mean, that guy had it all pretty much. You know, that he was going to be a star, and he gets cut from an NFL team, tries out for a semi-pro team, then starts his murderous ways after that's over. Let's see what the chat's saying. Truth says they can get CTE before even leaving high school. You lose impulse control and any thought of consequence or reasoning. That's true. Texas says still probably happened today. Think about how strong and powerful a man is. You take away his impulse control, reasoning, and thought of consequence. You get one hell of a problem on your hands. That's true. Good comments. No doubt, truth, it can get pretty wild when you get a few of all in a pod and they get wound up. Nah. One kid got CTE and ended up offing himself with a shot to the chest in the woods and left a note to have his brain analyzed. Yeah, he's living a happy life, getting to stare at mountains and trees every day. That is true, Texas. He looked like he hadn't aged that much. I mean, I didn't know him when he was in the 70s or 80s or 90s. But I mean, for what, 64, they said? He looked pretty damn good. But that's what happens when you're in prison. You're just kind of preserved. You're not aging. You're not regressing. You're just slowly withering away. And here is the next one. Are y'all still good? We're at the hour point. Just making sure you are still good. This one's Mr. KIBBE. KIBBE. This is the i-5 Strangler. So he's probably roaming go every day 12. Yeah. GP. Well, let's learn about Mr. KIBBE. He was the Strangler, the i-5 Strangler. So we had the killer, and then we had the Strangler. Here we go.
Grew up in the National City Navy projects outside San Diego. KIBBE tells investigators that his father, now deceased, was a naval officer who was rarely home, and that as a young boy he was neglected by his mother, a woman he refers to as his dad's wife.
She wasn't a good mother. I don't call her that. Dad served 21 years in the Navy, left me and my two brothers home with his wife. I don't call her the M word. I don't have one. Dad would come home from...
You know, that's sad because I had a good buddy who passed away, and he never called his mother. He called her by her first name. Never did I hear that guy call his mom, her mother. He called her by her first name. He disliked her tremendously.
Navy base late at night, and 2 or 3 years old, finding me in the garden in a pair of diapers. Why I'm out there, I don't know.
He recognized that she was never good to him, wasn't warm, didn't take care of him, beat him, abused him, neglected him. And that, of course, is a source of his hostility toward women.
Going through elementary school, couldn't read or write. Going through junior high, couldn't read or write. In the middle of the senior year, I was asked to leave school because I couldn't read and write. Dad went to the principal and he was told that we just keep pushing him along and eventually they get it. Well, eventually he never got around to me.
What else do you remember about the way your mom treated you?
Always yelling. What did I do? There's been times when I've even tried to get closer to her because maybe I needed her and I wasn't getting her. No more lunches in school, no money to eat at the cafeteria. I told him, if you ever find my yearbooks, I'm wearing t-shirts, not regular dress shirts. It was just bad all the way through.
Doesn't he still sound like he's living in the day that he stopped caring? He sounds like he's still right there in the present day that he decided that I'm done with this woman. Oh, here's the guest. My guest is here. Everybody say hello to Molly.
Who's in there? Who's in the laundry room?
Howdy.
Doing what?
Hey, Molly, how are you doing? Hey, Molly, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Hold on, let's keep. Hey, Molly, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, howdy.
Hello.
How are you?
Living the dream.
Living the dream. Welcome to our panel. I was telling a friend and a girlfriend about you and about how you used to work in a jail and EMS. So I guess if you'd like to answer some questions and give us some kind of background on some things, we might have some questions for you. Did you watch any of these videos?
I did start watching the first one you sent. I watched most of it.
What do you think about that guy?
I mean, I think that there's a whole lot of more people out there like him. We just haven't caught him yet. I
Yeah.
think he's not one of a kind. I think that, we even have a federal database that's set up for local authorities to put murder cases into so that they can match the different MOs together and say, okay, this might be a serial killer. Let's see what we can do to find them. It's unfortunately, I think, more common than what we think.
Okay. Can you share any of your stories with while you worked at the jail, and then we'll get to the EMS part. I mean, I know that you and I have talked, and please call me 12 or Gage, whichever one you prefer. So you don't have to tell where you worked at, but how long were you at the jail?
I actually ran a jail and a sheriff's office for about 5 years total. Uh, we had all kinds of. It was a smaller jail, but you have everybody that comes through there. You have murderers. You have all types of people. So
Mm-hmm.
I was a jailer. I had my jailer's license and my dispatch license through the state, and then I also I became the sheriff's administrator and was in and out of court cases and things like that, dealing with the FBI, lawyers, you name it, I did it.
Okay. So I know that the people in my chat, I try to educate them because there's one that's in there that has been a corrections officer, and there's some others that have some experience with the law enforcement side of it, medical side of it. Can you tell me about some of the people that you saw that went through? What were some of the? Okay, let me ask you this. Let me retract all that mess. You know how I am. You got to stay with me here. So can you describe the average criminal that you saw coming through the jail?
I'm going to say that the average criminal, in most cases, probably had a very poor childhood or upbringing. And I don't mean poor in money wise. I mean, they had traumatic experiences, they were abused, they were neglected. Um, Almost every single one had something in their history growing up of neglect or abuse. A lot of times there was mental health issues, whether they were on meds or they were self-medicating with illegal substances. I'm going to say mental health is a big thing that crosses over from on any type of crime. Uh, and there's a lot of drugs that come through, a lot of drugs that are running concurrent with your murders or your assaults or even just their thefts. They all kind of interlink with it.
Mm-hmm. So, did you have a lot of problematic behaviors? I mean, them breaking the rules and things like that, trying to get over on you?
I mean, so early on in my early 20s, I worked as a juvenile correctional officer. So I worked in a prison setting with youth, and we always had to set a line and so draw the line in the sand, so to speak. And if they stepped over that line, you had to correct that behavior. And even if it was just, hey, you need to check yourself up, your behavior is not, you're not following the rules. And so in jail, much like in juvenile prison, you have to draw that line in the sand, and you have to be a hard no on things. You can't be wishy washy. You can't be their friend. I'm not saying that you have to be ugly, but you do have to be an authoritarian and take control of the situations. Because an inmate is going to take you for everything that they can. And once you give them an inch, they're going to try to take a mile. And you do have the rule breakers. You have the ones that are just going to constantly push and push and push, and you're going to have to draw that line. A lot of them will just sit back and say, okay, this person's at work today, or I know that if this person has to come back into this jail, it's bad news. Usually, if I was in the jail, it was bad news because somebody was acting incorrectly, causing a big problem. There was a fight, there was some kind of disturbance, and they would say, "Oh, here comes Molly. It can't be good." And so that was kind of my job, was just to take care of a lot of issues. You have your problematic inmates, and you have inmates that are just really there to do their time until they go to trial, or until they get shipped off to prison or to state jail. Uh,
Right.
it just depends on, but you definitely do have, especially ones with the bigger mental problems like schizophrenia and stuff like that, that they don't even, the reality of the situation is they don't even know what's real and what's not. And so they're more problematic in that they can't be in the main population and things like that very often.
Okay. So, did y'all have? I'm going to ask you these questions because they kind of echo with a case that's really popular right now regarding an inmate. Did y'all have special diets for the inmates? Like, let's say that they didn't eat certain things, or they wanted a special type of diet. Did y'all accommodate that in the jail?
It depends. They do have the kosher diet that they have to feed. There's, exemptions for religious purposes if they don't eat pork, things like that. If there's a medical diet that the doctor makes them have, yes, in the state of Texas, you do have to feed that inmate. In a jail, you do by state law have to feed that inmate that. And really, in the state of Texas, you have the Texas Commission on Jails, and they regulate even down to a menu, a weekly menu of how many calories it has to be, how many servings of fish, things like that. And you have to get that approved once a year through the state to say what you're going to feed. And I know a lot of other states are way more relaxed on what um, what their policies are, what their procedures are, what their laws are. But the state of Texas is very highly regulated, and to the point where an inmate can write the commission and write a complaint against you. And you, as an employee, have to answer to them, and they can file criminal charges on you for your behaviors, for not feeding properly, for improper medical care, not providing medical care soon enough. I mean, just a number of things. Texas is very highly regulated. So when I see people kind of talking trash about, oh, this jail or that jail, I'm like, I don't think you understand. Like, there's a whole nother set, there's a whole commission that is on top of all the jails. And they're like safety inspections. They do, I mean, fire alarms working, smoke detectors working. I mean, it's a whole overall thing that they regulate every little thing in that jail.
And I'm glad that you said that because there is a lot of misconceptions of, word on the street is this and that, and, they don't do it like this, or they make you go without that. I know the juvenile justice system here in Texas is getting a bad rap right now. But as far as the adult corrections, I think that they have done a lot of revamping, and I think that, like you said, the commission that oversee that are very diligent in trying to maintain a sense of order. So, did you ever have any high profile people in your jail?
We did not because we were such a small jail. We did have some murders that we housed for other counties under contracts just
Mm-hmm.
because they were overpopulated at their jail or they didn't have the type of cells that it took to house that inmate. When you have somebody who's murdered somebody, usually their first 48 to 72 hours, they come in and they're held in what's called suicide watch. They're put in what we call a Barney suit or a padded suit. And some jails, they have like a padded room that they also go into. The padded suit is kind of like a dress, and it has
Yeah.
Velcros at the shoulder and Velcro at the sides. And you really just watch them because you don't know when maybe reality is going to hit them. Are they going to try to take their own life when they realize what they've done? That kind of thing. But we didn't have anybody too crazy high profile that came through, just kind of local murders, stuff like that. We had a guy who was out of Ohio once for murder, but he was probably one of our best inmates that we ever had. Surprisingly enough, we didn't have any issues out of him. And he was like, until I get sent back to Ohio, I'm just going to sit here, just going to do what I got to do.
Kind of like what this guy's wearing right here. This little green thing.
Yeah, they're usually green or blue. They're like a padded quilted thing. It's so that they can't tie it around anything in the cell. There are suicide cells that they put them in with no handicap bars, no toilet paper holders, stuff like that as well. But and then they require you have to do a check every so many minutes on them, depending on how high risk they are. You have to do a check every so many minutes on them. Are they awake? Are they breathing? Hey, can you respond to me? They don't get a blanket. They don't get toilet paper unless it's like what we would call a roll up. So many wraps around your hand. They're
Why
not
would
allowed.
why wouldn't they get a roll of toilet paper?
There's just certain things that they could do with it, is the thought. And they're put in a cell without a phone. I don't know. A while back, there was an inmate who hung themselves with a phone cord. And so now, if you're in a jail, the phone cord can only be so long. There's a lot of preventative measures in a cell in a normal jail now to keep from being able to do anything. So
Right.
the
Did
toilet
y'all,
paper, just
did
another.
y'all have the standardized steel door, one person to a cell, or did y'all have the old timey bars that slides?
So our jail is actually, when I worked there, it had just become 10 years old. While I worked there, we had our 10th anniversary. The jail that I worked in was actually the smallest one built of its kind at the time. Um, and we had to get special legislative approval to have a jail of that size. We could hold 28 inmates um, before we were overpopulated, which is fairly small, but still fairly large.
Yeah, yeah.
We didn't have your typical jail bars. No, we had the doors with the plexiglass windows or bulletproof windows in them. And so it's most of the cells that you see that have the bars now are older jails.
Yeah.
Uh, the jail standards, the building new jails. Now you do have some old ones that operate with the bars, but that's very far and few between because it's very hard to pass inspection on those type of jails anymore.
Right, right. So, what was the most problematic behaviors or any type of problematic area that you saw as a jailer regarding the inmates? What was something that really was always problematic to you?
As far as inmate behaviors or just problematic in general?
inmate behavior?
You know, you have a lot of, and you have a lot of different personalities that you're kind of putting in a in a room together, because you have cells, you have single cell housing units, you have holding cells when you first come in, and then you have multi where you have multiple people. And
Right.
you always had to kind of watch how you housed your population based on their offenses. Um, you know, obviously, you're not going to want to put somebody who's a white supremacist with a child molester, because they're not going to make it very long, probably, because they're going to do what they think they should do and take that person out, even if the person's not been proven guilty yet.
Right.
Um, you know, just you have a lot of theft, you have a lot of bullying. You really have, if somebody gets white boxers sent in versus the, you know, the brief underwear that we give them, you have to really watch, because they will, for lack of a better word, punk somebody out for their stuff.
Right. Right. Yeah.
You know, it's you're gonna
That's
have the
quite interesting. Yeah.
you're gonna have the typical. We've had people that came in that were used to being in very much bigger populations like Dallas, you know, some big huge jail, and really just have to act like they were tough, and have the other inmates saying yes sir, no sir, to him as the running the cell. And you know, it would make me laugh. But we had one guy that was, this one particular guy, he would break a rule, like he would keep a cup from breakfast. Well, the cups from breakfast have handles on them, so you know
Yeah.
it's one of the kitchen cups. And you go down there, and you're like, hey, I need that cup back. And they're like, what cup? We don't have a cup. Nobody has a cup. All we have is these cups that we're supposed to have without the handle. And I'm like, look, I can see in the camera. Just give me the cup back. Don't make me come in your cell, you know. And they would look at him, and he would go, what? Well, sir, she wants the cup back with the handle, you know, just to give permission to give me the cup back. And I'm like, no, no, no. See, that's not how that works. You know, you really have to be proactive and stop that type of stuff. You really have to shut it down, or it just becomes like, you know, you're, it's, it, it never ceased to amaze me just how far some people would go. You know, as a jailer, you have rules to follow, and, or even just as a supervisor, and you know where those limits are, and you're not trying to abuse anyone, but you're definitely trying to keep control of, you know, 28 people who have their own personality and their own issues, their own anger issues, and whatever else going on. So
Right. So overall, would you say that it was a good experience? Did you learn a lot? Did you already have a mindset of what to expect once you got in there, or did you learn as you were going?
well, I was 20 when I started at the Texas Youth Commission, and I already had some like managerial experience. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that that's a lot different when you're in a prison, but it's kind of not, because you're there to do a job, and they're there to be there. You know, they did a crime. No, it's not your job to condemn them for anything they may or may not have done, but it is your job to say, look, this is the rules, and I'm just here doing my job. So
Right.
outside of this, we're not going to do it, you know. And so I learned a lot at my job in the 5 years that I worked at the sheriff's office and the jail, just in general about crime and the court systems, and you know, overall pretty much everything, because it was a really, I went to federal trainings and some stuff like that too, so it was really a neat experience for me. um, I like to learn a lot, and I was already in EMS for 13 years, so, and I worked for 7 years in the juvenile prison system, so it was just kind of adding to my toolbox over there.
Right. Right. Yeah, I remember our conversations of you having to go to court and stuff like that. I used to remember our morning conversation sometimes when you'd have court day or whatever, and you always loved that, didn't you?
Oh yeah, you know, it's always entertaining though, because you have the family members, and sometimes you could tell like the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. So
Uh,
you just really, you know, if you come into court and you're barely wearing any clothing as a family member, that's probably an issue.
yeah, especially especially since there's a dress code, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, and or if you're telling me, well, I know the laws because I've been to prison. I've been to prison. Okay, thanks, great. I just really need you to sit down and stop yelling and screaming now. That would be great.
Yeah, yeah. So, you were saying you were saying about the EMS stuff. What got you into that? I know that that was about the time when you and I first interacted and started a friendship. What got you into the EMS stuff?
Well, I was in my 20s. I had a few children, and I lived in a smaller town, and we had a volunteer EMS. And I hadn't gone to college or anything yet, and I decided to take a class for free to be a local volunteer on the ambulance. At the time, it was called an ECA, and it was like a basically emergency first responder, where you did some medical care and you learned how to drive the ambulance. And I did that the first year, and the second year I went and got my EMT, and then they sent me to class to be a teacher because there's some college courses you have to take to be a teacher of the EMS stuff. And then I went to medic school. Once I got into it, I loved I didn't want people to have bad calls, but if there was a bad call, I wanted to be there for it because I found that my brain just ran smoothly. It wasn't even something that I had to stop and think about. It was like muscle memory, and um, it was just you don't even talk to your partner. If you work with somebody, you just automatically know what that person's going to do, and you take care of it. And if something's not working, you look at each other and go, "It's not working." We go on to the next thing. It was just always something, and the quest for knowledge, I guess, I liked that. I liked the adrenaline rush. I became addicted to the adrenaline rush of the bad calls and the CPR and I didn't like losing people, but the bad calls and the fact that my brain didn't have to stop to think, that it was just a fluid thing, was always what
Right.
I loved about it.
Well, I'm glad that you're talking about that because I don't know if you followed the Idaho 4 case at all. Um, do you know that case?
I have watched some stuff about it. I have listened to some stuff about it. I think everybody has varying. Listened to varying opinions about it. Why Koberger is, why he isn't. I
Well, they just released a 911 call, and there's been a lot of speculation on crime scenes. And I know that being a EMT, obviously you've been in crime scenes, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so let me ask you the first couple questions. Would you, when you first enter a crime scene and it's a stabbing or it's a gun case and the individual is deceased, let's take the stabbing first. If would there be, just like the movies, would there be a lot of blood all over the place of some of the ones that you've seen or many of the ones, or is it contained to the person?
So I think that depends on the crime, on how, because like my understanding of the Koberger case or the Idaho 4, whatever you want to call it, you know, if someone was running from someone, then yes, there would be a lot of blood trails. If someone was laying in a certain spot, let's say they were just in bed and got stabbed, all the blood is going to be in that bed, other than what maybe dripped off the weapon, right? Or splattered onto the person who did the stabbing. Um, so really that just depends. But like as a first responder, you're trained when you go in there, you don't want to step in any blood. You don't want to leave your shoe prints anywhere if possible. Um, and when you're going in somewhere as a first responder, especially in EMS, you're going in to save anybody who potentially can be saved. You're not going in to do anything other than say that person has no heart activity. That person cannot be saved. They're cold and dead. They're not savable. Um, you're not going in to unless there's some chance of saving that person. So essentially, when you go on that crime scene, and you come back out, there is a person who is in charge of that crime scene and saying, okay, medic Molly was here at this time, entered and left at this time. They should be really good records so that if there is a question, they can go back and they can get my DNA and my fingerprints and clear me of any set of fingerprints that are questionable or anything that's questionable. When I write my report, I'm going to say, I saw patient one, identified as whoever it is, slumped over a bed, between a bed and a wall, with multiple stab wounds, not compatible with life. I'm going to write all of that out, detailed, upstairs, right room, whatever. I'm going to write that detailed in my report so that when it does go to court, if I'm called to testify 5 years from now, I know everything that I did on that crime scene. There's going to be a copy of the EKG that shows no electrical activity. There's going to be, different things. We stayed on scene till the JP got there and pronounced, whatever the case may be. You're
Right.
very specifically, if you cut anything off, you're not going to cut through the stab wounds. You're going to cut around it. You're going to save everything. It's going to be bagged. So you're really trained when you are one of those people going in, not just as a police officer, but as a medic or a first responder. You're trained for that.
That's what I've tried to correspond to my viewers is that, you're just not going in blindly. You're just not going in like you see in the movies or you see in a TV show and you're just looking all over the place and you're just staring at the scene. You're trying to help these people, like you said, to make sure that there's any sign of life or there isn't. Well, in this case, obviously, the police were the first ones on the scene. EMS was supposedly told to stand down. Have you ever been told to stand down that, you don't need to come into the scene?
Yes. So
What does that usually entail? What does that mean?
So one of two things. When someone calls 911 with a case, I think somebody's in my house. We think that somebody's dead. We think there's been a stabbing. We think there's been a shooting. What happens is as EMTs or medics, you are trained for your safety first. You're trained to never sacrifice your safety because you can't help anybody else if you can't help yourself. And so a lot of times they will say, hey, they'll page out and say, we need you to stage. And you may be 3 blocks from the scene, you may be 6 blocks from the scene, depending on what the actual call is. And you may sit there and never come to the scene because, like you said, there's nobody alive or there's no reason for you to be there. And so there are times where there's no reason for you to go to scene and say that there's nothing. If the people there on scene were showing signs that are not compatible with life, rigor mortis, large volumes of blood loss, dismemberment. And when I say dismemberment, I mean like maybe they're just decapitated. They're not going to call us to scene for things that are obvious. They're not going to call you to say, hey, can you check and make sure there's no electrical activity? Can you make sure, there's things that they're trying to look for that they're just not going to. And so they may have been put on standby to stage away from the scene until the scene was safe. And then once they cleared the scene, usually they'll say, okay, the scene is clear. Come to the scene is what they will do. And then you go in. So I'm going to guess that once they went in, they saw that nothing was compatible with life. And that's maybe why they were not called all the way directly to the scene.
Okay. Because, we did hear early on that, the EMTs were not allowed in. They were called out, called back. And, a lot of conspiracy had been converging on this case, and there's been a lot of speculation. There's been a lot of, well, this would mean this and this would mean that. And it's usually from individuals that try to give a demeanor that they've actually been in that experience before. And it's refreshing to hear it from you who's actually been in that situation, like it's not like you're making this stuff up, you're not You're not embellishing anything. You're giving it straight like you saw it. What were the most horrendous situations you saw, um, like responding to a crime? Like, let's say a traffic accident.
I mean, I've picked up pieces of people who were hit by an 18-wheeler outside of their vehicle. Um, I've, it's always a hard loss when you lose a kid of any type in an automobile accident or otherwise. Uh, you see people cut in half. You see people beheaded. You see people, one person's out walking around and thrown from the vehicle, and the other person is in two pieces inside the vehicle up in a tree. You see all kinds of things, when you're out in the world, and you see people who take their own lives with a shotgun or whatever else they had available. So you really kind of see a little bit of everything. Self-inflicted, accidental, they accidentally shot themselves. So you really, it's a whole gamut of things, that you
Right.
see. I mean, even just an elderly person who's been married to the same person for 60 years and you're telling the spouse that there's nothing you can do. That's heartbreaking too. It's not just the gruesomeness of it. It is the loss of life ever because you train not to lose life.
Right,
And,
right.
anything you can do, you're as a first responder, as a EMT or a medic, you are trained to keep that person alive. You're not trained looking at long term. You're looking at short term. Let's keep them alive until we get them to a doctor, to a hospital, to a trauma surgeon, to the next step. And so, a lot of people don't realize that when you have a loss of life and you're in a position as a medic or an EMT, you go over that call step by step. We did this, we did that. Okay, this didn't work, that didn't work. When you lose somebody, you do that even more so because you're training to bypass that the next time, to maybe have a chance to save them. Even if you knew there was no way you were saving that person, you still do it.
That's true. That's true. And a lot of times, you have those emotional attachments at times because, like you said, it's a child. It's you're wanting to save this person, no matter what age they are. You're wanting to save them, and you lose them. Did you ever have to get any like professional counseling or anything because of that?
So
Like go through therapy or anything to deal with?
so you do what's called debriefings, as an agency when you have a hard loss. In the moment, if you are in the moment, you put your emotions to the side. You really learn to compartmentalize,
Hmm.
um, and not draw any lines. And you really just have to deal with it after the call or after your shift. And so, yeah, I have sought counseling. I have been in counseling in the past. Because you do have some that are hard losses. I guess I always kind of looked at it as if God wanted me to save that person, He would have given me the tools to do it, the means to do it. And so I know that I never blatantly did anything that caused anybody to lose their life.
Right.
Uh, but there's always that thought of you could do something better, and you have to go in, and sometimes you do have to just cry, and you'll see a lot of police officers and you'll see a lot of medics and a lot of fire that they laugh about the craziest things, and it seems like they're tone deaf, but it's not that they're tone deaf. It's that they've seen such horrific things that the only thing they can do is laugh, or they would be crying. And so if you see somebody making a joke on a family member's deathbed, or something like that, it wasn't meant to be hurtful towards you or your family. That is a survival mechanism that you evolve, that you have. It's a trauma bond, it's a trauma thing. And so
Hmm.
a lot of people don't understand that. When you see somebody online laughing about something or making a joke about it, it's because of their experiences and the things that they have seen in their job, more than likely.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, PTSD is a real thing. Like some of the people in the chat are talking about right now, it is a real thing. It's like you're going in, whether it be EMT or whether it be a jailer, whether it be a police officer, whatever it might be, you're going in with a lot of uncertainty. Did you ever fear as an EMT that you would not be coming home? I mean, did you ever have those moments at all?
Well, I have had knives and guns pulled on me in the moment of an elderly patient that had called 911 and was demented and pulled a gun on us, stuff like that. And that's just something that thankfully I have, um, that I've always been really good about being able to respond to and deal with and take control of a situation. Thankfully, even in my personal life with some of the things that I'm pretty sure you know about, I've just always been able to compartmentalize and not have to worry about making it home. Um, you get control of the situation, you get the knife away or the gun away. You call for police to show up, whatever the case may be. But you do get PTSD. There are things that you do. I see the chat now. I'm looking at it, but there's things that in my personal life, I lost a little brother to suicide. So sometimes suicide at work would really kind of trigger me a little bit, just to be I was a little bit extra sensitive about it. Uh,
Right.
even just your personal life experiences sometimes play over. You know, it's different for everybody, I think, but
That's true. That's true.
that's your second family, and a lot of first responders, as far as EMS and fire, work 24-hour shifts. So you spend a lot of time with those people. They become a second family, and you do. But yeah, I mean, there were times where probably more so I would worry about my kids whenever they were out doing something or out with their other parent, that maybe wasn't as responsible as I thought they should be, because I saw something bad at work one day or I had something bad happen or, things like that is more so that my kids wouldn't come home
Right.
than
Right.
than me going home because I knew I could take care of myself, I guess.
That's true. Well, I'm going to play some more of this video. Do you mind sticking around and commenting on it?
No, that's fine.
Okay, let me go ahead and get back to it. This guy was what they call the i-5 strangler. The other guy was the killer. So this guy was a different type of killer along Interstate 5. So here we go.
Well, I do want to try to understand about why your mom would neglect you so, because you seem to think that's important and sounds important to me too.
I call it pretending to be a housewife.
Did she give you any serious beatings?
I think I was beaten several times. I can remember one Christmas, I got up and took a canister of flour and sugar and dumped it on the living room rug and got my little car from underneath the tree and Megan rode through it. I got beat pretty good for that. I got beat for not being home on time.
Did you have any friends as a child?
I basically was a loner. I stayed to myself. In grade school, I started stuttering real bad. I'd open my mouth and nothing would come out. And for about 2 years, I never said more than one word because it was that bad. I was basically a loner all through life.
KIBBE says it was during the early 1970s that he married his second wife, Harriet. His failed first marriage from years ago was long over. Now in his early 30s, KIBBE works at a gas station and then manages a furniture store that eventually fails. KIBBE tells investigators it doesn't take long for he and Harriet to begin arguing, which drives KIBBE deeper into his killing rage. A month
I don't know about anybody else, but it sounds like all of the classical traits are there. Doesn't get along with mom, has issues with this, has issues with that. It just seems like all the characteristics are there.
Well, you also have that he struggled in school too. Abuse people is what I've always been trained.
Hmm.
Uh, and then you do see a lot of not high school graduates who are criminals. You see a lot of people who have lower IQs or was dyslexic and struggled through school. You do see a lot of criminals who have a lot of what he had going on.
Yeah.
monster in the outside world, he manages to keep his murderous actions a secret from his wife during their entire marriage.
I had so many knives in my back because of her. She didn't cook. No breakfast, no lunch. 1 or 2 dinners I can remember. My God, I married my mother all over again. I would bring my checks home and stupidly give to her. I needed money for gas. I needed money to eat on. It wasn't there. I got pissed off at her several times, almost beat her.
What would a perfect wife be like if you could design one to your specs?
I don't think there is a perfect wife.
Besides trying to understand Kibbe's past, Dietz is also here to try and gather important information about how he killed.
Did his shoes found down on the way bottom. So is he saying he threw her around? He didn't. He drug her down in here.
Police say they have dozens of open cases that closely resemble the Kibbe murders. If Dietz can get Kibbe to admit certain things about murders he claims to have committed, he may well be responsible for other unsolved cases.
Can we talk about Stephanie Brown now?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Kane. I was thinking the same thing. He almost beat her. I'm sure he did beat her. What do you think, Molly?
I'm going to say he did quite a few things.
Yeah.
Kibbe's second victim, Stephanie Brown, was a 19-year-old student. This time, Kibbe says his ruse was pretending to have car trouble when Brown stopped to help him on the side of the highway. Police are especially interested in why Stephanie Brown, like many of Kibbe's other victims, had clothes cut from her body, something Kibbe refuses to admit doing.
You said that the claim in the records that her skirt was cut.
I was told her skirt was cut, and they told me I cut it. And I told them, you're full of beans. I never cut it. Didn't have to. I told her to take all her clothes off. She took all her clothes off, all in one piece. She was sitting there. I untied her. I told her, take your shoes off, put them in the next seat. Take your skirt off. Everything she took off, I told her to take off. They were never cut. Never.
Though Kibbe
You notice how when he got that change in his voice and demeanor, that's when you almost know that people are lying. What do you think, Molly?
It's almost like he's ashamed that he cut her clothes off. Like, was he in psychosis when he cut her clothes off, or
Yeah.
what made that part be shameful versus he made her take them off? Is it more violence to make her that he cut them off, or what's the? Be curious to know what his answer for that would be.
Exactly.
Shame because he cut them off versus making her take them off. I don't know.
Yeah.
is quick to deny cutting the clothes of his victims. The evidence at the crime scenes tells a very different story. One Park Dietz says fits with Kibbe's psychological profile.
To cut the clothing can provide gratification to the offender without injuring the victim. So in a sense then, cutting clothing is a kinder, gentler means of exercising the sadistic impulse.
I had told her to put your hair in a ponytail. I cut the ponytail off. Is that a sign that I'm pissed off at my dad's wife? Am I getting even with somebody? I don't know. I tossed her clothes, some of them, in the canal. They found the scissors in the canal. They found the skirt, they said, was cut in the canal. More cop lies. I never cut that skirt. Somebody else had to do it.
When Roger was 15, 16 years.
So, Mr. Kibbe, why would we find a pair of scissors and a skirt that was freshly cut? Somebody else had to do it, Molly.
Yeah, it's crazy the things they won't own up to, but they'll own up to others.
Yeah.
Years of age, he was going to the clotheslines and stealing women's clothing, and he was bringing them back home and cutting them at that time. He will sit there and tell us about the rape that he committed on the women, and he will sit there and tell us about the strangulation without any problem. When it came time for the clothes cutting, he would back off. In his mind, strangling and raping, that's okay. People do that. but cutting clothes is very strange.
She's the only girl that I remember the name, Stephanie Brown. I don't remember the others. Why do I remember her? I don't know. She was a bank teller. Her and her girlfriend just bought a house.
You learned all that from her?
Yeah, she told me a little bit.
A little bit.
And I did my deed. I strangled her and went home. It keeps getting easier and easier and easier to do it.
What gets easier?
Killing.
Coming up, Park Dietz.
So, Molly, you hearing this? What goes through your mind? You know, I'd like to get your perspective on this because I know me hearing this, I have a perspective of my own. What do you think whenever you're hearing this guy talk like he is?
You know, the part that he's shameful about is kind of crazy, but it kind of makes me wonder if he doesn't have a more personal tie to the clothing being cut off. Do I believe he cut the clothing off? Yes, I do. But was he at some time raped himself? Was he at some time had his clothes cut off? And, you know, is there some type of personal tie that he has to the clothes cutting that he's not wanting to say because he's ashamed of what happened to him? That's what I'm wondering, if why he feels shameful about that part of it. If he doesn't feel shameful about the raping of her, he doesn't feel shameful that he killed her, but cutting the clothes off, that's where we're going to draw the line. Like that, what moral compass is that's where you draw the line?
Right. I like that.
Delves deeper into the mind of a killer.
At what point in the process of taking a girl out do you know she's going to die?
If you saw your child in water like
I think we can handle it.
Roger Kibbe, otherwise known as the I-5 Strangler, continues to tell Dr. Park Dietz everything about the murders he's committed.
When did you cut it?
I usually took pieces that I had.
It's a grueling and at times horrific process.
How about this fella?
No.
That's not you?
Oh, he's got a nick in his ear, like I do in the right ear. I don't recognize it.
And part of a plea agreement in which Kibbe agrees to tell the truth about his crimes to avoid the death penalty. Prosecutors want Kibbe to confess so that victims' families learn the truth, while giving Kibbe a chance to open up about unsolved cases.
You understand that this is a time-limited opportunity to confess to any of them
Right.
without any legal risk.
Right. And I told the officer, I'm not going to confess to something I didn't do. I can't do that.
And nobody wants you to do that.
I've heard that so many damn times in my career, Molly. I am not going to cop for something I did not do. Okay, so what does that mean to you? You're not going to cop with the way that we're bringing it to you? But if we brought it in the way that you understand it, you'd say, yes, that was me? Have you heard that before?
I have heard that before. I think that it's the way that it's tomato to us, but to them it's like, well, I didn't do it because of the way this way. I did it this way over here.
Yeah.
You know, and I really, the way that his crimes are, I really would say that he probably was sexually abused at some point in his life by his mother or by a female figure, somebody female, I'm going to say, because I've just heard too many stories from people who have committed horrible crimes and done horrible things that, you know, early in their childhood, at some point, there was some kind of, and I may be totally wrong, but that's just the way it feels, the way that he's speaking.
Well, one thing for certain, when you work around enough people and you hear enough people's MOs, it kind of starts to add up in your head. There's something that you can't ignore. You know what I mean? It's like a sixth sense after a while. You just know how the puzzle pieces are going to fall. It's not rocket science. You're right.
I can't do that.
But we would like you to confess to what you really did do.
Yeah, and I've already done that.
And you haven't got any others.
No others. I can stand on 7, and that's it.
God.
Whether you want to believe me or not.
At what point in the process of taking a girl out do you know she's going to die?
I haven't figured that one out yet because I don't know why. I don't know if it's right now, halfway down the road, or while I'm doing it. I don't know why I picked these 7 out of all that I picked up and let loose.
Were there any occasions on which the strangulation itself was a turn on for you?
There's been times when I sat and thought about it, and I come up with the idea that while I was doing it, my mind was a blank. Someone took my mind. I would look off in another direction.
Oh, wow.
Look up at the stars if they're ready. That one in Berryessa up on the hill, when I was doing her, I looked up and saw the Big Dipper. I just stared at the Big Dipper while I had my hands around her throat. I don't know how long it takes. To me, it felt like it just took a few minutes. I've had people tell me that it takes much longer than that.
In Roger's mind, strangulation was a kinder and gentler way to kill somebody. I think it was a power trip, knowing that he had in his hands the control of their life. He did tell stories where he had strangled the women with his hands. He could feel the vocal cords inside their throat, and he could just squeeze and just feel the life go out of them.
How many nights did you go look for a victim and find nobody?
That sounds to me like, dissociating from the crime, even though he's putting somebody in the place of whoever he's killing. That way he can imagine whoever it is that he's killing.
Disassociation, definitely, with that. I was looking at the moon and the stars and I don't know.
Yeah, like I'm not looking at the victim while I'm strangling them, but I don't know how long it takes. Okay. You're not looking, but you're inflicting this horrible pain on this person and ultimately killing them while I'm watching the Big Dipper. You're right. Wow.
Well, and the whole thing about the just never mind. I forgot what I was going to say.
It happens. It happens.
2-3 nights, maybe.
So not a lot.
Not a lot, no.
Usually, if you wanted one, you found one.
I'm going to say 50-50. A lot of nights, we didn't find anything. They're out there, but not what I wanted. Other nights, they stick out like a sore thumb. They're willing to get into a car. That's their mistake.
Anything she could have done to avoid being pulled into the car in the first place?
Kept on driving. Kept on driving until you got off the freeway where there were stores around. Way at the end, Highway 12, where there's lights, where there's people. Stop at a gas station. Get directions, get back on the freeway, go home.
And if someone did make the mistake of pulling over, maybe even to be a good Samaritan to a motorist who's broken down, how can she avoid being dragged into a car by the likes of you?
Not good. Not good at all.
Well, people.
I mean, the fact that he is so nonchalant about it, Molly, what, just like, well, it's her fault.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if some of his shame, the things that he kind of feels shame for, aren't some of like a generational thing. In different generations, they were taught that certain things were shameful or certain things weren't acceptable. So I wonder if some of the way he's speaking is to due to that. Maybe his dad said this was not okay at some point, and he really respected his dad. Or, and I'm not saying he did. I'm just an example.
Right.
I just wonder if that has to do with some of the way that he's speaking, and it's almost like because bad things were done to him, it's okay that he did these bad things. Like it's, oh, no big deal, just another Tuesday.
Yeah, like I got in my car and went home. Drank me a cup of coffee once I got home. I mean, it's like, good Lord.
People should realize is that KIBBE is just the tip of the iceberg. There are more KIBBEs out there. When we did our investigation, we were flooded with hundreds of possible leads in this case. Some of these people are actually predators that are out there driving the roads among us, who live right among us. KIBBE made a comment that there was never a girl that was going to get away with him once he decided to take her. So, if anything else, be wary. Hopefully you're never in that situation, but I instructed my wife and my daughter, fight like hell. So once he has you in that car, they were done.
Coming up, the mystery of where Lou Ellen
It
Burley
took
was
place in
killed
California,
is
Sacramento.
Sacramento, California? Okay.
Yes.
I know you have daughters. What kind of advice have you given them through the years to defend themselves, coming from the background that you have?
I think that the best thing that we can teach our children is just situational awareness. When something doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel right. Obviously don't stop on lonely highways to help a
Mm-hmm.
man in the dark. But, I think that I've just raised my kids to pay attention.
Yeah.
Most of all, be street smart, be book smart, but be street smart and pay attention, make a lot of noise, walk like you're big and bad. Even if you're not, that's going to deter people sometimes. I always used to tell people I didn't have to be a badass in the jail. I just had to walk like I was one. They had to be afraid of me. They had to respect me. I didn't have to beat up some 100, 200-pound man. I just had to act like I could. So
Right.
it's just about that. My kids are very athletic and very sports oriented. So, but they're girls. So we'll see when they go to college. what
Right.
goes on. Hopefully they pay attention to what's going on in their surroundings.
Exactly.
finally solved.
It was a miracle. I think I'd go for the needle in the haystack, over this.
Follow your style.
The day after his court-decreed interview with Park Dietz, Roger KIBBE is allowed out of his cell once again. Investigators are hoping he will be able to find the spot where he killed Lou Ellen Burley in the rural mountains surrounding Lake Berryessa.
We drove to this pullout along Highway 128, and on the trunk of my car, I showed him the different aerial photos, what they looked like in 1977, what they looked like in 89, and then you could look at it and see how the area had changed. So it went like
It went.
the highway went this way.
It went this way, and then.
But you could have hit it with a rock.
Oh yeah.
And you look down on the highway.
Yeah.
Okay. You described that you had sex in the van,
Right.
and then you walked up over the top of a hill,
Right.
and then down.
Right.
It's very, very overgrown now.
Yeah.
Now, we had been there several times already with Roger KIBBE. We even put him in a helicopter because he was a person that was parachuting so much. We thought that maybe if we put him in a helicopter and he was able to see from above, he might be able to identify the location.
That's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
I find that I can turn around and go back.
We had him in 2009, so we did the same thing again. We drove up and down some roads. We got out, we walked some roads.
Though KIBBE has described this spot in great detail, once there he becomes confused. It has been more than 3 decades since the killing, and nothing seems the same.
I didn't see this comment, but I want your thought on it, Molly. PKC says, I wonder if in his mind cutting equals rape, but taking off equals consent. What do you think about that?
that could be true. You know, that's just one of those things that tomato, like to us in the real world, you know, but we also, without asking him that, we really wouldn't know. You know, there's
Right.
probably something to it, but now that he's dead, we'll never know. And there may be other videos somewhere else or more information somewhere else that has all of that.
That's true. That's true. Good answer.
There are no hills. It's all flat on top. There's dirt roads on top.
And what I'm saying is, see up there, does it look like it could be flat up there?
He said he wasn't up that high.
Things could change, but he's looking for specific items, so it was going to be extremely difficult for him to find that exact location. 32 years. This is our 4th time up here. We'll never find that spot. He's just not going to remember. We're not going to find it.
And if you stand here, you can look down into the valley.
Stand where? Stand where?
Well, if I was standing here.
There was
If
no
I was
other area
standing
in the
here.
patch. Either he was lying about where the homicide had occurred, or he didn't recognize the spot. But I knew her remains were in that area. They had to be.
What do you think the odds are?
None. We're not going to find nothing here. We're done. This is our last, definitely our last trip to this place. We're not coming back.
Do you think he's jerking you around?
Well, that's what we're wondering.
I don't. I think he'd give this up if he could.
I think he's probably trying, but in the back of my mind, it's always been, is he jerking us around on this?
Despite their efforts, investigators would not find the location on this day. It would take nearly 2 more years for authorities to solve the mystery. The first break came in 2010 when Napa County investigator Mike Fry found an ally, Napa County Deputy Mike Bartlett, who was familiar with the case.
Mike Bartlett was stationed at Lake Berryessa, and he called me and said, hey, I'm up here. It's off season. There's not a lot going on. Would you mind if I tried to find her? And I just thought that's exactly what we needed.
Finally, on a misty March morning in 2011, using information gleaned from the interview with Park Dietz and others, they find the location.
In 1977, when this occurred, Roger Kibbe parked his van up just over the other side of the ridge here at the top of the hill. He led her up over the top of the ridge and down this dirt road. This dirt road presently is about 10, 12, 14 feet higher than it was then. So he said he walked Ms. Burley along this dirt road. He was walking behind her and he strangled her, and then he said he put her in the ravine from there. After reading the transcripts and looking at the aerial photos, I believe he murdered her right about here.
Once I got to this area and realized that this isn't the way it looked back then, and that the road was approximately 10 feet lower with large boulders in the area, I felt that this was it. After hiking around the area for approximately a month, I started hiking this canyon down below us here, and within about 15 minutes, I saw a white speck the size of a dime or a quarter in about 6 inches of water. I reached down into the water and pulled it up, and as I was pulling it up, I discovered that it was actually a bone that was covered with mud and silt.
Hey, Molly, have you ever like in any of your professions, have you ever came across skeletal remains? I mean, were you ever called out?
We were not, because at that point we weren't needed. Have I seen skeletal remains in my other part of my job? Yes, but as a medic, no.
Yeah.
Put into evidence and sent off to the crime lab, that kind of thing. Yes.
Is it pretty creepy? Morbid?
No, it's probably creepier if it's just parts of someone that's recently been dismembered.
Okay. Good answer.
And as I examined it, I realized that it appeared to be a human hip bone. It was definitely a gratifying experience locating her and giving closure to her family, but without the efforts of everybody involved, it never would have happened.
Coming up Park Dietz gives his opinion of what drove the i-5 strangler to kill.
For you to have sex was at least as important as whether she lived or died.
When Dr. Park Dietz completed his interviews with Roger KIBBE, the i-5 strangler, he tells KIBBE what he believes made him a murderer.
Do you think you understood why you did your crimes?
No.
Are you curious?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't know why I did them.
Do you think you have any secrets left?
Nah. Everything's on the table. Everything.
Yet there's some mysteries, some things that don't.
Do you believe him?
Do I believe him?
Yeah.
I think in his mind, whether he has other victims or not, this is all he's going to say, because for some reason that number 7 is very important to him.
Okay.
Fit, some things that don't make sense.
Was it my childhood? Was it her? Was it my upbringing?
Would you like to know?
Yeah. I'd like to know.
I'm happy to tell you if you want to know.
No, throw it out there.
Well, I don't think you have to be a psychiatrist to recognize that whatever happened between you and your mother has been the source of enormous anger
Right.
that's generalized beyond your mother. You've had a long-term disregard for the rules, a disrespect for authority. You've been willing to get even when you perceive that somebody wrongs you. You are willing to steal and to lie and to cheat. And those are traits you've carried with you throughout your life, I think. That set of traits in which you've got anger and a willingness to break all the rules, no moral inhibitions against doing things, is a pretty familiar set of traits to mental health professionals. What it was called at the time of you're doing these things was sociopath or psychopath, and then it got the name.
Hold on, I have a question. Doesn't believe numbers can play a role with these folks. I didn't say I didn't believe it. I'm just saying that, I don't know. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, I guess.
So you don't think the number 7's significant to him? Why he would hold on to number 7 or stop at 7?
Yeah. Why do you believe that he would stop at 7?
It could be something that happened to him when he was 7 years old. It could be something in the 7th year of one of his marriages. It could be anything with the number 7. I mean, he doesn't want to go beyond the number 7, but it didn't seem to bother him that he murdered people, so why stop there?
Right. Yeah, I've just never really looked at numerology that deeply. I mean, I believe that it can, people can believe as they wish. I mean, I've just never deep dove into all that.
Maybe
But I'm
7
sure-
was a lucky number.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I mean, you never know.
Kind of like 12 is my number, so yeah.
Antisocial personality disorder. There's a piece of you missing to be able to feel what other people feel and relate to their suffering. So it doesn't bother you the way it would others.
Mm-hmm.
You accept all this so far.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if your only crimes were forcible rapes of women, maybe hating women is enough to explain it. But that isn't all you did. And it is a way to get even with women, to attack them violently one after another, to convey to them that you think they're worthless, that they deserve no respect, the same way you think your mom treated you. But to go farther than that, abduct them, hold them captive, keep them under your control for a time, and then ultimately strangle them after 1 or 2 orgasms on your end, that's more than just anger toward women, isn't it?
I believe so.
That's almost like the Oedipus complex in a perverse way. I mean, to gain that control back from the woman that he never had from the closest woman in his life, which was his mother, gaining control back, and then the sexual component, I really don't see that part. But I mean, I don't know. There could have been a fascination with his mom. What do you think?
Maybe so. I thought it was interesting when he talked about how the other women in his life, like his wives, were just as worthless as his mom. You know, how many times have you seen in your professional life or otherwise that people tend to go after somebody that's just like their other parent? Like I marry my dad, you marry your mom, that kind of thing.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, how does all that play into it?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah, you're right.
As I was telling him what my opinions were, he was nodding in agreement. And I wondered each step of the way whether he was going to stand up and walk out, whether he was going to get angry, would I see a flare, what was going to happen here.
It's a fact that from your point of view, back when you were doing this, for you to have an orgasm or sex was at least as important as whether she lived or died.
Yeah.
She didn't matter more than that.
I have to agree with you.
What would make sense of the whole story of abduction, rape, captivity, binding, strangulation, homicides is if you've also got a special sexual interest in that area. And there are a bunch of clues that you do, but you're saying not true to every one of them. The clues that, if believed, would explain this are the cop who says that when you were a kid, you stole some female clothes and you cut it up. You cut female clothing. And the story that you were, as a kid, found tied up with women's clothes and claimed that you'd been kidnapped and put there. The reason those would be so important, if they're true, is that cutting female clothing is a kind of substitute for cutting a woman. It's a non-bloody, non-violent, actually, substitute for doing harm to a person, to cut their clothes or to cut their photograph, because those don't bleed and nobody dies.
Oh,
And as ways to kill go, I can see how you might think of strangulation as not as brutal as some of the other ways you might.
You're good, Molly. You're good. Kind of like, what do they call that? A mercy killing, right?
Yep.
Huh?
Oh yeah. I just
Mercy
that
killing.
whole. I
Yeah.
don't know that I think I would rather just die instantly and not be strangled to death, like suffocation. That would be the most horrible thing ever.
Right. Right. Please, please, can you just put me out of my misery? You done got yours. Just let me go. But this guy really seems. I got to deep dive into this guy. He seems like one of those people. I know he's not around anymore, but to pick his brain would be interesting. He's just so stoic.
But it makes you wonder also how much. I mean, how many years after his killings was this interview?
Right, right.
So you have to wonder, like, at this point in this interview, how many psychologists, psychiatrists, how many people has he talked to that have studied him? And so he maybe came up with the correct answers over time.
Right.
He knows what the correct answer is and isn't. This is just one interview. That's why I say it would make me wonder, how much exposure he's had. Did he, after he went to prison, did he start? I know he didn't really probably read much, but, some
Right.
people get into that stuff and they're like, oh, well, normal people do this and this is what I do. And, maybe he studied it. So he's got he's so removed from it that he just looks at it as maybe he studied himself.
Right. And you're
Because
onto something right there. I mean, the notoriety of him being the i-5 strangler. I mean, that is part of the MO. I'm going to get notoriety. People are going to know who I am. A method of control, even
Well,
in prison.
when he's talking about like his mom and And am I killing people because of my mom? Am I, he's already associating those things together, which to me is not a normal thing to associate, you know.
Right.
So he put two and two together somewhere along the line in his interviews and his counseling, his therapy sessions, somewhere along the line, he's put two and two together. So how much
Yeah.
of this that he's saying is just where he's put two and two together versus it just being in a truthful thing, right?
Yeah.
From the first day he got caught.
True.
Might have killed them,
Yeah.
beating them to death or cutting them apart. Now, today, when I ask you about all these crimes in detail, you don't admit to the cutting of the clothing, and you deny cutting clothes when you were a kid. These are parts of the story that you distance yourself from. And there's a couple possible reasons of why you're denying those things to me and to law enforcement. One possibility is that you don't remember. These things are too painful for you to remember, and you've pushed them down. I don't really buy that, but some people would. Another possibility is that these things are too shameful and too private, and it's nobody's business. So you're not going to reveal that because you don't want people to think of you as being some kind of pervert. So I think that you've got some private fantasy life that involves tying women up and keeping them captive, and where you'd like to hurt them, but you'll make do with the substitute of cutting the clothing or cutting a ponytail because you don't want to see yourself as that kind of person who cuts women up. That's what I think.
All right.
You want to ask anything else?
No. You're doing a good job.
In the end, he said, "You're doing a good job." So I think he accepted that what I said nailed it.
Roger KIBBE avoided the death penalty. He is serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole.
Wow. It's a hell of an interesting field to be in for sure, to be able to, try to get into the mindset of how and why. I don't think we'll ever get to crack that code because the criminal mind, as what I've experienced, and I'm sure you have as well, is well adaptive to their surroundings. Whatever you want them to be, they chameleon themselves into that environment. If you want them to be remorseful and to get them something, then they're going to be remorseful. If you want some truth and some reward, then that's how they're going to be as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. He kind of seemed like he was a chameleon in essence. Like I said, just his.
Yeah.
I just would have liked to seen his original interviews with police before this one. As far as the chat asking what his IQ was, I don't know. I just know that in the first part of the interview, he said that he was kind of just pushed through. He was just pushed through school. That he wasn't. He never it never clicked with him, and they just kept pushing him from grade to grade. So I'm going to assume that he was either dyslexic or had some kind of something because I don't see his IQ listed anywhere that I can find.
And I work with juveniles now, and I see a lot of these behaviors, and I try to push it to the back of my mind, but it's hard. Especially when you see that their IQs or their level of understanding is very low, but they have the capacity to be brilliant when it comes to being on the other side of the coin. Breaking the law, being deceptive, deviant, all that stuff. They have the capability to be excellent in that realm, but when it comes to following rules and being academically, superior, it's not going to happen.
Well, and I think that you have to think about when we think about people being smart as far as being good in school, book smart and test smart and star test smart and things like that. That's a whole different a whole different matter than someone who is smart and can build a house with their hands, or, just because you can't pick up a book and do addition doesn't mean that you're not smart. It just means that you're not good at that, right? So either way.
Right. Well, I mean, I've really enjoyed it. I hope to see you up again soon. I mean, I think that we bounce good off each other. I guess that has to do with our friendship for so many years, We've had some of these conversations, not necessarily in front of a lot of people, but you and I have talked a lot, and we kind of know how each other is going to respond to certain things, and that's a plus. Would you be open to come back some more?
Yeah, sure.
So, chat, do y'all have any questions for Molly?
I was trying to join the chat, but the StreamYard wouldn't let me for some reason.
Oh,
Yeah. I don't know. I'll have to figure
are
that
you
one
on
out.
your phone?
No, I'm actually on my computer, my MacBook,
Okay.
so it may just be something where it's not.
Yeah, you're
Well,
getting.
thank y'all for having me. I see y'all's stuff, so and just because I said something doesn't mean to make it true either. It's just my opinion and my training and my basis. I've just dealt with a lot of people, a lot of things, even in my personal life, some craziness. So, with psychopaths and whatnot, but
And
it's just always,
you're friends with me, so that tells a lot about you.
yeah, it should be, shady characters, but
Yeah, the shady characters.
shady characters.
Well, thank you so much. Here's another one. I'm gonna go back and watch the slide. Had a little scare with my 12-year-old.
Oh
Sorry.
no.
Hope everything turned out okay. Yeah, family's always first. Don't ever apologize for not being in here. Family's first. It's very important. So,
But yeah,
Molly,
maybe send me the stuff earlier so I can look at it more before, maybe a couple days before you want me on here.
I think you did brilliant. I think you did awesome. I think you did awesome for like what 8 hours notice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I worked in a
Hey, I know that's the kind of person you are. If I send it 2 days before, you'd be like, "Well, I'm gonna watch it 30 minutes before I got to go on with you." So it doesn't
well,
matter, It doesn't
I
matter.
did work 2 jobs today and take a child to the doctor, to ortho, and go to Hobby Lobby, and I barely made it home before this. I was listening to it on my way home.
Okay, awesome. We
Um,
appreciate you.
I think that to answer that question, Melissa, um, I think that a lot of inmates, a lot of criminals become institutionalized, and they would rather stay alive than die because they still can get letters and get commissary and have interaction with their family. I think that if you've ever had anything to do with any type of inmate situation, there's games that they play and they love to play the games. So, um, a lot of them, they want to stay alive as long as they possibly can. So they're going to want to be in prison for life if they can get that. They want to play that game. They want to have multiple women they talk to. They want to find women to marry and have multiple people sending letters and money, and they become addicted to it. We call it in jail. We call it 3 hots and a cot. Because they would just come back so often. But yeah, I do think that any inmate that is looking at the death penalty, they would rather stay alive, even if their life is kind of nothing. They would rather stay alive.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is the sad existence of an inmate. Is you know. Also, I believe that people are misconstrued with the notoriety of what some of these crimes give out. That they believe that these people should be let out. Let me ask you really quickly: when you hear somebody say that person's innocent, Okay. We all understand are presumed innocent until found guilty, right? Have you ever seen in your experience an innocent person come to jail?
So I think that when you say innocent, you think they didn't do it. I think that when, in the eyes of the law, they're not trying to necessarily prove that the person didn't do it. They're trying to just prove reasonable doubt, right? If there's any doubt in the jury's mind that the person didn't do it, because there are so many loopholes for different things and how things were handled, evidentiary. I mean, there's just so many things that I'm going to say innocent people don't come to jail most of the time. But we had a murder in the jail, or not in the jail. We had a murderer come to jail in the county that I ran the jail, and he ended up federally charged, and he got away with it, even though he was a parolee. Um, he was on parole at the time, so he had been to prison um, for drugs and a violent crime, and he shot somebody. And at the end of the day, it came out that um, the jury found that he wasn't guilty because of self-defense, even though he had a gun and he shouldn't have had a gun because he was a felon. It happened outside of his house, so he wasn't defending his house or himself inside of his house or on his property, which would have been legal for him to have the gun at that point. I think that just because someone's found not guilty doesn't mean they are not guilty of that crime. I don't know if that makes sense, but there's so many legally, so much things that kind of blew my mind in my 5 years that I had no idea how the criminal justice system actually worked. Um,
Right.
not just with criminals, but even with things like CPS and children custody and things like that, with parents getting their stuff back. But you know, I don't know. If they are innocent, that all comes out in court, and at the end of the day, sometimes the judge is the one that says, hey, there's not enough evidence. If it's not a jury trial and prosecutors don't want to prosecute because it's not 100%, then people who aren't innocent are getting away with things because prosecutors don't want to prosecute. So it's not always about innocence or guilty. I hate to say it, but it's not.
Okay. Well,
But
thank you for answering that like that. I mean, I like how you answered that. Very thorough, very thorough. Well, guys in the chat and gals, I guess I'm going to call it a night. Thank you so much, Molly, for being on here. If you want to stick around after the show is over to talk a little bit, I'll leave you down. Just don't click out, okay?
okay.
All right. Thanks again for being here. Gosh, I'm just removing you. Like, okay, let's just.
Welcome.
All right. We're going to close this out. And like we always do, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your patience and your questions and everything in between. Hope y'all enjoyed it. Have a good night. And Maestro, cue that music.